Chicago wrapped itself in December's cruel embrace the night James Harper found himself walking through snow that hadn't stopped falling since morning. The city's holiday lights blurred through the white curtain, each storefront window, a memory of celebrations he no longer belonged to. At 52, with silver threading through dark hair and lines around eyes that had seen too much loss, he'd grown accustomed to spending Christmas as a visitor in other people's joy. The Meridian Financial Tower rose 40 stories into the winter sky, its upper floors still glowing with the jaundiced light of fluorescent ambition. James had left his sister Lauren's house 3 hours ago, escaped the cheerful chaos of his nephews tearing through wrapping paper while their parents pretended not to notice Uncle Jim checking his phone every 10 minutes. The call came at 9:30. His junior analyst panicked about quarterly reconciliation files sitting on James's desk instead of uploaded to the secure server where Monday's emergency audit would demand them. So here he stood at 11:15 on Christmas night, laptop bag, heavy on his shoulder, watching his breath fog in the air outside the building's glass doors. The security guard waved him through without comment. James Harper, working late, surprised no one. 20 years at Meridian had built his reputation one midnight spreadsheet at a time. The elevator carried him to 14 in silence. His floor stretched empty cubicles, dark except for the glow of his computer monitor left running. He grabbed the files, uploaded them with practiced efficiency, and sat for a moment in his chair, staring at the framed photo beside his keyboard. Linda smiled back at him from 8 years ago, her face still young, still alive, still the woman who'd promised to grow old with him before cancer decided otherwise. The walk back felt longer. Cold had teeth tonight, wind off Lake Michigan, cutting through his wool coat like it remembered every winter he'd survived without her. The next train wouldn't come for 20 minutes. James turned up Michigan Avenue, hoping movement would keep the cold from settling into his bones. Murphy's Tavern materialized from the snow like an invitation he hadn't asked for. The kind of place that existed in the shadow of gleaming towers without ever quite belonging to that world. Scarred wooden booths dim lighting a jukebox that probably still played actual CDs. James had been inside twice in 5 years, both times for retirement parties of colleagues whose names he barely remembered. But the warm glow spilling from its windows looked like mercy. The door swung inward on a wall of beer-scented heat, nearly empty. A bartender wiping glasses, an old man nursing something amber at the far end of the bar, and a woman in a black coat hunched over a tumbler of whiskey in the corner booth. James ordered coffee, black, already counting bills, when the woman laughed. Not a happy sound, sharp and bitter, the kind of laugh that came when tears ran out, but the hurt kept coming anyway. He knew that laugh. He'd heard it in conference rooms and shareholder meetings, though never quite so raw, never quite so stripped of armor. James turned slowly, hoping he was wrong. He wasn't. Victoria Sinclair sat in Murphy's corner booth with her $1,500 coat draped carelessly beside her dark hair, falling loose around shoulders that usually carried the weight of a billion-dollar company without flinching. Those cold gray eyes that had stared down hostile takeovers and budget negotiations without blinking now showed red-rimmed and glassy with drink and something that looked dangerously close to despair. The CEO of Meridian Financial, his boss's boss's boss, the woman whose quarterly addresses were legendary for their precision and ruthlessness. Forbes had called her the Ice Queen of Michigan Avenue in a profile last year. Now she sat drunk and alone on Christmas night, and James's first instinct screamed at him to leave immediately. Whatever breakdown was happening in that booth existed so far above his pay grade that witnessing it felt like trespassing. He could walk out, catch his train, pretend he'd never seen the most powerful woman in Chicago crying into cheap whiskey. But something in the set of her shoulders kept him frozen. The way she curved in on herself, like she was trying to take up less space in the world, trying to disappear into the worn leather of a booth that had absorbed decades of other people's quiet desperation. The bartender's voice cut through his paralysis. "You gonna drink that coffee, or just hold it?" James blinked. Right. He moved toward an empty booth on the opposite side, deliberately choosing a seat that kept his back to Victoria Sinclair. Not his business, not his problem. She was a grown woman who could handle her own disasters without input from a mid-level analyst she'd probably never noticed. He made it 3 sips into his coffee before her voice cut through the quiet bar like a blade. James Harper. The words carried that unmistakable authority, slightly slurred, but still commanding. Senior Analyst Audit Division. You won the Lawson Efficiency Award 2 years ago. Your quarterly reports are the only ones I don't have to correct. James closed his eyes briefly, then turned. Ms. Sinclair. Victoria. She lifted her glass in a mocking toast. Titles don't mean much at 11:30 on Christmas night in a dive bar, do they? He should agree, make small talk, finish his coffee, and leave. Instead, he found himself standing, walking over to her booth, asking the question he already knew he'd regret. Are you all right? Victoria laughed again, that same bitter sound. Do I look all right, James Harper? No, ma'am. Good. At least one person in this city is still honest. She gestured to the bench across from her. Sit, unless you're afraid being seen with a drunk CEO will damage your sterling reputation. No one's here to see anything. But he sat anyway, setting his coffee on the table between them like a neutral barrier. Victoria studied him with eyes that were unfocused but still sharp enough to be unnerving. You're wondering what I'm doing here. It's not my business. That's the correct corporate answer, but you're curious. Everyone's always curious about me. She drained the rest of her whiskey and signaled the bartender for another. Do you know what I did today, James? I assume you had Christmas plans. I worked. The word came out flat. I worked until 6 o'clock. Then I went back to my apartment. Do you know where I live? No, ma'am. Penthouse, Lakeshore Drive, 3,000 square feet, floor-to-ceiling windows, $12 million. She accepted the fresh whiskey from the bartender with a nod. I walked into that $12 million apartment, and do you know what I heard? James shook his head. Nothing. Victoria's voice dropped to something quieter, more dangerous. Absolutely nothing. No music, no voices, no life, just my footsteps echoing off imported marble. She took a long drink. So I left, got in a cab, told him to drive until I said stop. Ended up here. She gestured around the shabby bar. And it's the first place I've felt human in months. Why are you telling me this? Because you're here. Because you haven't run away yet. Because I'm drunk enough to be honest and sober enough to know I'll regret it tomorrow. She leaned forward, elbows on the table. Do you have family, James? A sister. 2 nephews. Did you see them today? Dinner at her place in Naperville. Was it loud? The question caught him off guard. Yeah, the boys are 7 and 9. Everything's loud. Were there arguments, chaos, burnt cookies? Uncle James watched this. Uncle James helped me with this. All of the above. Victoria smiled, but it was the saddest smile James had ever seen. I would pay everything I have for one loud, chaotic, burnt cookie Christmas. Instead, I have $12 million of silence. She raised her glass. Merry Christmas to me. James didn't know what to say. This wasn't the Victoria Sinclair he knew from quarterly meetings. The woman who could dismantle a failing department with 3 sentences, who negotiated billion-dollar mergers without breaking a sweat, who wore power like other people wore jewelry. This was someone else entirely. Someone lost. I should go, he said quietly. And I think you should too. Let me call you a car. I don't want a car. I want... Victoria trailed off, staring into her whiskey like it might hold answers. I don't know what I want. That's the problem. She looked up suddenly, eyes focusing on him with unexpected intensity. Walk me home. What? Walk me home. Through the snow, like a normal person who had too much to drink and needs help getting back safely. She stood swaying slightly, then steadied herself against the table. Unless you're too afraid of the optics. CEO and senior analyst spotted together on Christmas night. The scandal. That's not... Then walk me home, James Harper. Consider it your good deed for the day. She was already pulling on her coat, already heading for the door with determined, if slightly unsteady steps. James threw money on the table and followed, catching up to her on the sidewalk as the cold hit them both like a wall. I'm on Lake Shore, Victoria said, starting to walk. It's not far. It was at least a mile, and she was wearing heels, expensive heels that had no business navigating snow-covered sidewalks. This is a bad idea, James said, falling into step beside her. All my best decisions are bad ideas. That's how I built an empire. She stumbled slightly, and his hands shot out to steady her elbow. She didn't pull away. You didn't have to follow me. You're drunk, and it's below freezing. Of course I followed you. Noble James, I bet you're the kind of man who holds doors and walks on the outside of the sidewalk. My mother raised me right. Where is she now? Your mother. She passed 8 years ago. Victoria's steps faltered. I'm sorry. That was thoughtless. It's okay. You didn't know. They walked in silence for a block, snow falling heavier now, coating the empty streets in fresh white. The loop at midnight on Christmas felt like walking through a snow globe, beautiful and isolated and somehow unreal. My mother's alive, Victoria said suddenly. Phoenix, Scottsdale actually, gated community. She sends a card every year, never calls, never visits. She tells her friends her daughter is very successful and very busy. We haven't spoken in 4 years. I'm sorry. Don't be. She made her choice. I made mine. Victoria's heel caught on an icy patch, and she grabbed James's arm, holding on this time. I chose the company, the power, the corner office. I chose success over everything else, and I won. Look at me. I won everything. The bitterness in her voice could have stripped paint. They turned onto Lakeshore Drive, the dark water of Lake Michigan, stretching out beside them, the Gold Coast towers rising ahead. Victoria's building was obvious even from a distance. Sleek, modern, obscenely expensive. You know what the worst part is? Victoria asked, her voice quieter now. I'm good at what I do, really good. I saved Meridian from bankruptcy. I turned it into one of the most profitable financial firms in the Midwest. I'm brilliant at corporate strategy and terrible at being human. You're being human right now. I'm being drunk. There's a difference. She stopped walking, suddenly turning to face him on the empty sidewalk. Snow caught in her dark hair, melting on her flushed cheeks. Why did you really come with me, James? And don't say it's because you're a gentleman. Nobody's that good. He could have lied, should have lied. Instead, he told the truth. Because I know what it's like to be alone on Christmas, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Victoria stared at him, something shifting behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. You're alone too. Sometimes. But you have your sister, your nephews. I do, and I'm grateful for them. But at the end of the night, I still go home to an empty apartment. I still wake up to silence. I'm just better at pretending it doesn't bother me. Why are you alone, someone like you? Decent, stable, employed. You should be married with kids by now. James shrugged. I was married once. My wife died 8 years ago, cancer. I took care of her for 2 years while she fought it. After she passed, I didn't know how to be anything except alone. Victoria's expression softened. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. It doesn't feel long, does it? Loss never feels long. They reached her building, all glass and steel and modern luxury. The doorman, blessed Tony, didn't even blink at the sight of his resident being half carried by a stranger at midnight. Miss Sinclair, good evening. Evening, Marcus. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, ma'am, sir. The elevator ride to the penthouse was silent. Victoria leaned against the wall, eyes closed, breathing carefully. James stood on the opposite side, hands in his pockets, trying not to think about how badly this could go wrong. He was alone in an elevator with his drunk CEO heading to her apartment at midnight. If anyone found out, the consequences would be swift and brutal. The elevator opened directly into her apartment, and James's thoughts scattered. He'd expected luxury. What he got was an art installation meets museum meets mausoleum. Everything was white and chrome and glass. The furniture looked like it had never been sat on. The kitchen gleamed like it had never been cooked in. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed the lake and the city lights, but somehow the view made the space feel even emptier. Welcome to the Fortress of Solitude, Victoria said, kicking off her heels and padding barefoot across marble floors. $12 million, and it feels like a hotel lobby. She was right. It was beautiful and impressive and completely devoid of life. No books on the shelves, no photos on the walls, no mess, no warmth, no evidence that a human being actually lived here. You should drink some water, James said, and take some aspirin. You're going to feel terrible tomorrow. I feel terrible now. Tomorrow will just make it official. But she went to the kitchen anyway, opening cabinets until she found glasses and a bottle of aspirin. You don't have to stay. I'm home safe. Your good deed is complete. I'll stay until you drink the water. She filled a glass, drained it, then filled it again. Satisfied. Getting there. Victoria laughed, and this time it sounded almost genuine. You're stubborn. I didn't notice that before. You've never spoken to me before. Not directly. I've noticed you, though. You're the one who fixed the Carrington audit without being asked, who stays late when everyone else goes home, who never makes excuses when something goes wrong. She set the glass down. I notice competence, James. It's rare enough to be remarkable. Thank you. Don't thank me. Competent people threaten the comfortable mediocrity everyone else is trying to preserve. You'll make enemies. Speaking from experience. Always. She moved toward him, steady on her feet now, though her eyes were still glassy. You know what's funny? We're the same, you and me, married to the choosing ambition over connection, building careers instead of lives. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell whiskey and expensive perfume. The difference is you still have time to choose differently. I'm 45. This is what I built. This is what I get. It doesn't have to be, doesn't it? She reached up her fingers, brushing his collar, straightening it absently. What would you have me do? James quit. Walk away from everything I built. Become someone else at 45. I'd have you consider that maybe success doesn't have to mean solitude. Her hands stilled. They were standing too close now, close enough that he could see the flecks of blue in her gray eyes, close enough to see the crack in her carefully maintained armor. You should go, Victoria whispered, but she didn't step back. Yeah, I should. Neither of them moved. If you stay, she said quietly, if you come upstairs with me right now, we both know what happens. And tomorrow everything gets complicated. Power dynamics, corporate ethics, regret, all of it. I know. So why are you still here? James stepped back, putting safe distance between them. Because someone should make sure you're actually okay before they leave. And because complicated is better than taking advantage of someone who's vulnerable. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Surprise giving way to something softer. Something that looked almost like relief. You're serious. Yeah. You're not going to kiss me. You're not going to stay. You're just going to tuck me in and leave. I'm going to make sure you're safe. Then I'm going to go home. And tomorrow we'll both pretend this didn't happen. Victoria stared at him for a long moment and then laughed. A real laugh this time, startled and genuine. You're either the most noble man in Chicago or the most oblivious. Probably both. She walked past him to the couch, the pristine white couch that looked like it had never been used, and collapsed onto it with theatrical exhaustion. Fine, be noble, but I'm not going upstairs. The bed's too big and too cold and I hate it. I'll sleep here. James grabbed a throw blanket from a nearby chair and draped it over her. Do you have coffee for tomorrow? Kitchen, top cabinet, probably expired. I'll make fresh. You'll thank me when you wake up. Doubtful. He found the coffee, found the machine all chrome and buttons that probably cost more than his car, and figured out how to brew a pot. While it dripped, he explored the kitchen until he found bread and butter and made toast because drunk people needed food even when they didn't want it. When he returned to the living room with coffee and toast on a tray, Victoria was still awake, staring at the ceiling. You're still here. I made you breakfast for 3 a.m. She sat up, accepted the coffee, and took a careful sip. This is ridiculous. You're ridiculous. Why are you being kind to me? Why is that ridiculous? Because I'm your CEO, because I hold your career in my hands, because kindness toward me should be strategic, not genuine. James sat in the chair across from her. What if I told you I'm not being strategic? What if I'm just being human? Then I'd say you're wasting it on someone who forgot how to return the favor. I don't think you forgot. I think you buried it under ambition and survival and whatever it took to get where you are. But it's still there. He gestured to the coffee cup. You said Merry Christmas to your doorman. You remember my name and my award from 2 years ago. You notice when people are competent. That's not someone who's forgotten how to be human. That's someone who's lonely. Victoria's hands tightened on the coffee cup. You don't know me. You're right, I don't. But I know that look. I've seen it in the mirror. She was quiet for a long time, just drinking coffee and eating toast like it was the first meal she'd had in days. Maybe it was. What would you do, she asked finally, if you were me? If you'd built this life and realized too late that it wasn't enough, I'd stop pretending it was. Just like that. Just admit defeat. It's not defeat, it's honesty. Success doesn't mean anything if you're miserable. And you're miserable, Victoria. So are you. Yeah, but at least I'm honest about it. She laughed softly. Fair enough. She set down the coffee cup and looked at him. Really looked without the alcohol haze or the corporate mask. Thank you for tonight, for not leaving, for not taking advantage. You don't have to thank me for basic decency. In my world, basic decency is rare enough to deserve thanks. James stood checking his watch, nearly 2 a.m. I should go. You need sleep and I have a train to catch before they stop running entirely. James, she stood too, the blanket falling away. Tomorrow at the office, we really are going to pretend this didn't happen, right? If that's what you want. It's not about what I want. It's about what's smart, what's safe. Then that's what we'll do. He was halfway to the elevator when she spoke again. Or, he turned, or what? Victoria crossed the space between them barefoot and rumpled, and more real than she'd ever looked in any boardroom. Or maybe we don't pretend. Maybe we acknowledge that something happened tonight. Nothing inappropriate, nothing we need to hide. Just two lonely people who found each other at Christmas and were honest for a few hours. That's dangerous. I built a career on dangerous decisions. This isn't business, Victoria. I know. That's what makes it terrifying. She stopped just in front of him, close but not touching. I don't know what this is. I don't know what happens next. But I know I don't want to pretend you don't exist. I don't want to go back to quarterly reports and polite nods in the hallway. What do you want? I want to know if loneliness is all I get to keep from tonight, or if there's something else, something more. James's heart was pounding. This was dangerous. This was career suicide. Coffee, he said. What? Have coffee with me tomorrow, somewhere neutral, somewhere public. Not a CEO and employee, just two people who are tired of being alone. Victoria smiled and it transformed her face. That's possibly the most dangerous thing you've said all night. Probably, but you asked what I want. That's it. Coffee, conversation. No pretending. No pretending. She echoed the words, then moving faster than he expected, leaned up and kissed him. Brief and soft and tasting of whiskey and coffee. When she pulled back, her eyes were wide, like she'd surprised herself. Go before I do something else reckless. She stepped back, wrapped her arms around herself. Coffee tomorrow. Text me where. I don't have your number. Yes, you do. I put it in your phone while you were making toast. Despite everything, James laughed. Of course you did. I'm still a CEO. I'm allowed to be resourceful. But she was smiling and it was genuine and it made her look 10 years younger. The elevator doors closed between them and James rode down alone, his mind racing. He'd just agreed to have coffee with his CEO. He'd just been kissed by the most powerful woman in Chicago. He'd just stepped into something that could destroy his career or change his life, and he had no idea which one was coming. Outside, the snow was still falling, covering the city in quiet white. The streets were empty. The world felt suspended between one moment and the next. James walked toward the L station, hands in his pockets, breath fogging in the cold air. Tomorrow he'd have coffee with Victoria Sinclair. Tomorrow everything would get complicated. But tonight, on Christmas night in Chicago, two lonely people had found each other in a dive bar and chosen honesty over pretending. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start building something real. The train carried him home through the silent city. James stared out the window at the snow-covered streets and thought about gray eyes and bitter laughter, and the way Victoria had looked when she smiled, like someone remembering how. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number already saved in his contacts as Victoria. Thank you for tonight, for all of it. I meant what I said. Coffee tomorrow, he typed back. Same place we met. Murphy's, noon. It's a date, or not a date, or something in between. Something in between sounds about right. Good night, James Harper. Good night, Victoria Sinclair. He pocketed his phone and leaned back against the seat, a smile tugging at his lips, despite the danger, despite the risk, despite every logical reason to walk away. Maybe success didn't have to mean solitude. Maybe loneliness didn't have to be permanent. Maybe two people who chose an ambition over everything else could learn to choose differently. The coffee at Murphy's the next day was terrible, but neither of them seemed to notice. James arrived 10 minutes early, claiming the same booth where he'd found Victoria the night before. In daylight, the bar looked even shabbier. Scuffed floors, faded paint, the kind of place that survived on proximity to the business district rather than ambition. But it was neutral ground, and right now that mattered more than ambition. Victoria walked in at 12:03, and she looked nothing like the woman from last night. Gone was the rumpled coat and the desperate vulnerability. She wore tailored black pants, a charcoal sweater, minimal makeup, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked polished but not corporate, put together but not armored. She looked human. "You actually came," James said, standing as she approached. "Did you think I wouldn't?" She slid into the booth across from him. "I thought there was a 50-50 chance you'd pretend last night never happened and have security escort me out of the building Monday morning." Victoria smiled faintly. "I considered it for about 30 seconds. Then I remembered I was the one who kissed you, so having you fired would be poor form." The waitress appeared same woman from last night, though she gave no indication she recognized either of them. They ordered coffee, and Victoria requested a turkey sandwich she probably wouldn't eat. When they were alone again, silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable exactly, but heavy with everything they weren't saying. "How's your head?" James asked finally. "Survived. Barely. Your coffee and toast helped." She traced a finger along the rim of her water glass. "I don't usually drink like that. In case you were wondering if this is a pattern." "I wasn't wondering." "Liar. Everyone wonders. The Ice Queen falls apart on Christmas. There must be a reason. Substance abuse, mental breakdown, secret scandal." She met his eyes. "It wasn't any of those. It was just loneliness. Pure, simple loneliness that finally got too heavy to carry." "I know the feeling." "Do you really? Because from where I sit, you have family, community, people who want you around for holidays." "That's not the same as what I have." "You're right, it's not the same. But loneliness isn't a competition, Victoria. You can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. I go to my sister's house and play with my nephews and eat burnt cookies, and then I go home to silence. Different circumstances, same result." The coffee arrived, and Victoria wrapped both hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. "Why did your marriage end, really? Not the corporate safe answer you might give someone else." James considered deflecting, then remembered they'd agreed on honesty. "Because I was building a life with Linda that was real. We were partners. She was an oncology nurse, I was an analyst. We weren't flashy or ambitious in the way careers measure those things. We just loved each other, and that was enough." He paused, the memory still sharp after 8 years. "When she got sick, I took a leave of absence. My boss told me I was throwing away my career. I told him I didn't care. Linda mattered more than any promotion." Victoria's eyes were bright. "She was lucky to have you. I was lucky to have her, even the hard parts, even watching her fade." James took a drink of coffee. "After she died, I threw myself back into work because it was easier than feeling. And now here I am, 52 years old, competent at my job and incompetent at life." "You're not incompetent. You're cautious. There's a difference, Vaishon. What about you? What happened to your marriage?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "I married a corporate attorney when I was 32. Brilliant man, ambitious. We were supposed to be a power couple, except he couldn't handle being married to someone more successful than him. When I made partner, before he did, he started picking fights. When I became CEO at 42, he filed for divorce. I'm sorry. I'm not. He would have held me back." She started on her sandwich, picking at it absently. "He married his paralegal 6 months later. They have 3 kids now. I saw the Christmas card on his Facebook page last year. They look happy. And you wondered if you made the wrong choice." "Every day." Victoria set down the sandwich. "I chose the corner office, the power, the money. I chose to be someone who mattered in boardrooms instead of someone who mattered to another person. And I thought that was enough. But it isn't. No, it's not." She looked at him directly, "Which is why I'm here. Because last night, for the first time in years, someone saw me as a person instead of a position. And I want to know if that feeling was real or just whiskey and Christmas desperation. James leaned forward. It was real. I saw you, Victoria. Not the CEO, not the ice queen, just a woman who's brilliant and lonely and brave enough to admit she wants more than what she has. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, what are we doing, James? You are 52, I'm 45. We work together. I'm your boss's boss. This is complicated in ways that could destroy both our careers. I know. And you're still here. I'm still here. Why? He thought about his answer carefully. Because I spent 20 years building a career I thought mattered. And then Linda died, and I realized all those promotions and raises meant nothing because I had no one to share them with. I don't want to make that mistake again. James met her eyes. Success doesn't mean anything if at the end of the day you have no one to share the victory with. Victoria's breath caught. She reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers cold despite the coffee. I spent 20 years building an empire. But empires don't hold you at night. Empires don't care if you're lonely or scared or wondering if this is all there is. They sat like that for a moment, hands linked across cheap formica. Two people who'd climbed different mountains only to find the same emptiness at the top. So what do we do? Victoria asked softly. We keep having coffee. We get to know each other as people, not positions. We take it slow and careful and honest. And when we go back to work, we're professional, appropriate, no different than before, except everything's different now. Yeah, everything's different now. They stayed for 2 hours. The coffee got cold and was refilled. Victoria's sandwich disappeared in small bites between conversations about books and running routes and the absurdity of corporate culture. James learned that she spoke French fluently, that she'd lived in Paris for a year after business school, that she'd once walked across Spain on a solo pilgrimage, and it remained the best month of her life. She learned that he'd grown up in Ann Arbor, that his father had been a union electrician who died young from a heart attack, that James had put himself through college, working 3 jobs because debt felt like failure. They discovered they both hated mushrooms and loved Thai food and had complicated relationships with success that looked simple from the outside. By the time they left Murphy's, the afternoon had turned to early evening. The holiday lights were coming on along Michigan Avenue, and the city looked magical in that brief window between day and night. They walked without destination, just moving through the cold air and the thinning crowds of post-Christmas shoppers. This is dangerous, Victoria said as they passed the Art Institute. Spending time together, getting to know each other. I know, if anyone from Meridian sees us, we're 2 colleagues who ran into each other during the holidays. Nothing scandalous about coffee. It feels scandalous. James stopped walking, turned to face her. Does it feel wrong? Victoria met his eyes and he saw conflict there. Fear and hope warring for dominance. No, that's the problem. It feels right, and things that feel right for me usually end badly. What if they don't this time? Then I'll have no idea what to do with that. They started walking again, and somehow Victoria's hand found his. Not romantically exactly, more like an anchor. A lifeline between 2 people who'd spent too long drifting alone. The next days unfolded with a rhythm that felt both natural and impossible. December 27th found Victoria at James's apartment in Logan Square, a 2-bedroom that couldn't fit in her penthouse's living room but somehow felt more like a home than anywhere she'd lived in years. She stood in his small kitchen while he made pot roast, the kind of comfort food his mother used to make when winter pressed too close. Victoria tried to help chopping vegetables with unpracticed hands. I'm 45 years old and I don't know how to make mashed potatoes, she said, staring at the potato masher like it was alien technology. That's pathetic. It's never too late to learn. James guided her hands, showing her the rhythm. Besides, you know how to run a billion-dollar company. I think you get a pass on potatoes. Those are different skill sets. Both matter, just in different contexts. After dinner, James picked up the guitar that had been gathering dust in the corner for 8 years. Victoria asked him to play something, and he chose an old jazz standard, his fingers remembering the patterns, even if his heart had forgotten why they mattered. You're really good, Victoria said when the last note faded. Why did you stop? Because after Linda died, everything that brought me joy felt like betrayal. How could I play music when she was gone? How could I enjoy anything? James set the guitar down carefully. So I stopped, boxed it all up, threw myself into work. And now I'm starting to remember that maybe joy isn't betrayal. Maybe Linda would want me to keep living, not just surviving. Victoria moved closer, sat beside him on the couch. I think she would, and I think she'd be glad you're trying. On the 28th, they went to the Art Institute, carefully avoiding times when Meridian employees might visit. They stood before Edward Hopper's Nighthawks, two people alone together, studying a painting of other people alone together. That was my life, Victoria said, gesturing to the isolated figures in the diner. Surrounded by the city, but completely separate from it. Was, I'm hoping for was, present tense is still being decided. That evening, back at Victoria's penthouse, she showed James something she'd never shown anyone. A bedroom closet full of books she'd been hiding for years. Romance novels and mysteries and literary fiction that had nothing to do with business or success or the image she maintained. I read these at night, she admitted, pulling out a worn paperback. After working 12-hour days, I'd come home and read about people who had messy, complicated real lives, and I'd pretend I was one of them. James took the book from her hands. Read the back cover. You don't have to pretend anymore. Don't I? I'm still the CEO who lives in a $12 million penthouse and eats takeout alone most nights. Then let's change that. James pulled out his phone. What's your schedule like this week? It's the dead week between the Christmas and New Year's. The office is basically empty. Why, bow? Because I want to see you again, and I want to do it properly, not sneaking around like we're doing something wrong. Victoria's eyes widened. James, we work together. If anyone finds out, then we'll handle it together. But I'm 52 years old and I don't have time for games. I want a woman who loves me for who I am, not because I'm safe or convenient or fit some image of what a partner should be. James took her hands. I want you. Complicated and scared and learning how to cook. All of it. Victoria kissed him then, and it wasn't like the brief kiss on Christmas night. This was certain, a choice made with clear eyes and full awareness of consequences. December 29th brought an unexpected complication. James's daughter Elise showed up at his apartment unannounced, carrying groceries for a dinner she'd planned as a surprise. She found Victoria there instead, helping James fold laundry with the kind of domestic intimacy that told its own story. Elise Harper, 24 and protective of her father in ways she'd learned when her mother died, stood in the doorway with a bag of ingredients and a look that could freeze water. Dad, who is this? James stood quickly. Elise, I didn't know you were coming. Clearly, Elise's eyes moved to Victoria, recognition dawning. Wait, you're Victoria Sinclair, Dad's CEO. Victoria stood, offering a hand that Elise didn't take. I should go. No, James's voice was firm. Elise, this is Victoria. Victoria, my daughter Elise. And Elise, you need to be polite. Polite, Dad? She's your boss. She's 45 years old. You don't see a problem here. Elise. But his daughter was already in motion, emotions 8 years in the making, spilling out. Mom's been gone 8 years. 8 years you didn't date, didn't even look at another woman. And suddenly you're with your CEO, someone who could destroy your career with a word. That's not fair, James said quietly. Isn't it? She has all the power. What happens when this ends? What happens when you're fired because it's easier than dealing with the scandal? Victoria spoke up, her voice careful. Elise, I understand why you're concerned. If I were in your position, I'd feel the same way. But I'm not using your father, and he's not some prize I'm collecting. Then what is this? It's two people who found each other at a time when both of us needed someone to see us as more than our jobs. That's all. That's everything. Elise looked at her father. Do you love her? James didn't hesitate. Yes, I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. But yes. And you, Ms. Sinclair, do you love my father? Or is this just some midlife crisis where you're slumming with the help? Victoria flinched but didn't back down. I love your father, and if that's hard for you to believe, I understand. I've spent 20 years being the kind of woman people don't associate with genuine emotion. But James makes me want to be different, better, more human. The silence stretched taut between them. Then Elise set down her grocery bag with careful precision. I need to think about this. She looked at her father, tears bright in her eyes. I need you to be careful, Dad. Please. You've been hurt enough. Come here. James pulled his daughter into a hug. I know you're scared, but I promise you I'm being careful. And I'm happier than I've been in years. Can you trust me on that? Elise pulled back, wiped her eyes. I'm trying. I don't want to lose you too. You're not losing me. You're just making room for someone else in my life. There's a difference. His daughter nodded slowly, then looked at Victoria. I'm sorry for what I said about slumming. That was cruel. You were protecting your father. I respect that. But I need time to process this, to understand it. Take all the time you need, Victoria said. I'm not going anywhere. After Elise left, James and Victoria sat in silence for a long moment. That went well, Victoria finally said, her attempt at humor falling flat. She'll come around. Elise is protective, but she's fair. Once she sees this is real, she'll understand. And if she doesn't, James took Victoria's hand, then we'll figure it out. But I meant what I said to her. I'm not giving this up because it's hard. New Year's Eve found them back at James's apartment, watching the countdown on television, while eating takeout Thai food that had arrived cold because they'd forgotten to answer the door. The office opens again in 2 days, Victoria said during a commercial break. We need to make a decision. What kind of decision? Whether we keep hiding this or whether we go public. James set down his container of pad thai. What do you want? I want to be honest. I want to walk into that building and not have to pretend you don't exist. Victoria turned to face him fully. But I'm also terrified. The board will have opinions. HR will have concerns. And there's a very real chance this ends with one or both of us losing our jobs. Then we do it right. We disclose to HR first thing. I request a transfer to a different department. We eliminate the direct reporting relationship and follow every rule they have. And if they say no, if they tell me I have to choose between my job and you, James was quiet for a moment, thinking carefully about his answer. Then you have to decide what kind of life you want. The one you've been living, successful, powerful, and alone, or the possibility of something different, even if it cost you the corner office. That's not a fair choice. No, but it's the choice in front of us. Victoria leaned back against the couch, staring at the television without seeing it. My whole life I've chosen the career, the achievement, the success. I've never chosen a person over professional advancement. Not once. I know. And you're asking me to possibly throw away 20 years of building my career for a relationship that's barely a week old. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm saying that if you want this, if you want us, then we have to be willing to fight for it. And that fight might cost something. The countdown began on screen. 10 seconds to midnight. 10 seconds to a new year. At midnight, Victoria kissed him, and when she pulled back, her eyes were clear and certain. Let's do it. Let's tell HR. Let's follow every rule and procedure and policy they have. And if they try to make me choose, then she paused, the weight of what she was about to say settling over her. Then I'll make the choice I should have made years ago. I'll choose life over work. I'll choose you. James pulled her close. You're sure? I'm terrified, but yes, I'm sure. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is being afraid and still moving forward. They spent the rest of the night drafting an email to HR. Professional, clear, honest. By 3 a.m., they had something that felt right. Victoria read it one more time. Once we send this, there's no going back. I know. We could both lose everything we've worked for. Or we could gain something we've been missing our whole lives. Victoria met his eyes. You really believe that? I really believe that. The question is, do you? She took a deep breath, then reached for her phone. Yes, I believe it. And I'm tired of being too afraid to tripo. The email went out at 3:15 a.m. on January 1st. By the time they fell asleep on James's couch, wrapped in each other's arms with the television still playing, they'd set in motion something that would change both their lives in ways neither could fully predict. But for now, in the quiet hours before dawn, they had each other. And somehow that felt like enough. The emails sat in their respective inboxes like a ticking bomb through the long hours of January 1st. James woke on his couch with Victoria curled against him, her dark hair spilled across his chest, and for a moment pretended the world outside his apartment didn't exist. But reality had a way of intruding. His phone buzzed at 9 a.m. Not a response to the HR disclosure, but a text from Donovan Garrett, his closest friend at Meridian for 15 years. Jim, Need to talk before Monday. Call me. Victoria stirred her eyes, opening slowly. What time is it? 9. We should probably face the consequences of our midnight email. She sat up, rubbing her face. I've been a CEO for 7 years. I've faced hostile boards and angry shareholders. Why does this feel scarier? Because those were just business. This is personal. They spent the rest of New Year's Day preparing. Victoria drafted a formal transfer request for James, moving him from audit to corporate strategy, eliminating any direct reporting relationship. James pulled his performance reviews from the last 5 years, documenting his competence, independent of Victoria's tenure. They built a case the way lawyers prepared for trial, anticipating every question, every attack. By Sunday evening, they'd run through a dozen scenarios. None of them ended well. They're going to make an example of us, Victoria finally admitted, closing her laptop with more force than necessary. Thomas Brennan has been trying to push me out for 2 years. He'll use this as ammunition. Then we fight back. With what? We broke policy, James. Not technically, since there's no rule against CEOs dating employees, but the optics are terrible. The optics are only terrible because people are more comfortable judging than understanding. James moved to sit beside her. We did nothing wrong. We fell in love. That's not a corporate crime. In my world, it might as well be. Monday morning arrived with the weight of an execution. James dressed in his best suit, the charcoal one he saved for major presentations. Victoria put on her armor, a midnight blue dress with a structured blazer that made her look untouchable. They took separate cars to Meridian, arrived at different times, maintained the pretense of professional distance. The pretense shattered the moment James stepped off the elevator. His cubicle farm, normally alive with the ambient noise of analysts working, had gone quiet. 20 pairs of eyes tracked his movement from the elevator to his desk, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Donovan materialized beside him before James could even set down his bag. My office, now. Donovan Garrett's corner office was small but private, earned through 18 years of loyalty to Meridian. He closed the door behind them with deliberate care, then turned to face James with an expression somewhere between concern and anger. Tell me it's not true. Tell you what's not true. Don't play games with me, Jim. The entire 14th floor is talking about you and Victoria Sinclair. Someone saw you two at the Art Institute last week, walking around like a couple, holding hands. James felt his stomach drop. Who saw us? Does it matter? The rumor's out there. And if it's true, Donovan stopped, running a hand through his graying hair. Jim, what were you thinking? I was thinking I found someone who makes me feel alive for the first time in 8 years. She's the CEO. I'm aware of her job title, Donovan. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you just threw a 20-year career into a wood chipper for a woman who has the power to destroy you with a phone call. The words stung more than they should have. It's not like that. Then what is it like? Because I'm trying to understand how my best friend, the most cautious man I know, suddenly decided to date his boss's boss's boss. James sat heavily in one of Donovan's chairs. We submitted a disclosure to HR. First thing New Year's Day. We're following every protocol, every rule. I'm requesting a transfer to eliminate any conflict of interest. And you think that's going to be enough? Donovan's laugh was bitter. Jim, there are people in this company who've been waiting years for Victoria to make a mistake big enough to take her down. Thomas Brennan has been plotting against her since she got promoted over him. You just handed him the ammunition he needs. To take her down, or me. Both. You think they're going to let this slide? Oh, how nice the CEO found love with the middle-aged analyst. Let's throw them a party. Wake up, Jim. This is corporate warfare, and you two just painted targets on your backs. The office phone rang. Donovan glanced at the caller ID, then picked up. His expression shifted from annoyed to concerned. He's here. I'll send him. He hung up. Gerald Morrison wants to see you. HR office, 4th floor, immediately. James stood, straightening his tie. Did he say why? He didn't have to. The walk to the elevator felt like a perp walk. More eyes, more whispers. By the time James reached the 4th floor, his shirt had started sticking to his back, despite the building's aggressive air conditioning. Gerald Morrison's office occupied a corner with a view of nothing particularly interesting. The HR director was 58, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had perfected neutrality, through decades of delivering bad news to people who thought they were irreplaceable. Jennifer Calloway from legal sat beside him. That was never a good sign. Mr. Harper, thank you for coming on short notice. Gerald gestured to a chair. I assume you know why you're here. I assume it's about the disclosure email Ms. Sinclair and I sent. Among other things, Jennifer opened a folder, pulling out several printed pages. She slid them across the desk. Photographs. James and Victoria at the Art Institute standing close while examining a painting. James and Victoria walking along Michigan Avenue, their hands linked. James and Victoria sitting in a coffee shop window, leaning toward each other in obvious intimacy. The photos were dated December 28th, 29th, 30th. Where did you get these? That's not important right now, Gerald cut in. What's important is that evidence suggests your relationship with Ms. Sinclair began before you disclosed it to HR. We disclosed it the first day we could after the holiday closure, January 1st. Your email was sent at 3:15 a.m. on January 1st, which suggests you'd been together on New Year's Eve. We had. Jennifer leaned forward. Mr. Harper, I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. You're a senior analyst. Ms. Sinclair is the CEO. That power dynamic creates significant liability for the company, regardless of whether the relationship is consensual. It is consensual, completely. I'm sure it is, but perception matters. And the perception here is that the CEO is involved with a subordinate, which opens Meridian to accusations of favoritism, hostile work, environment, and a dozen other HR nightmares. I've never received any special treatment from Ms. Sinclair. My performance reviews are consistent with my work output over 20 years. There's no favoritism. Yet. Gerald's voice was gentle but firm. There's no favoritism yet, but what happens in 6 months when you're up for promotion? How do we know that promotion is earned versus granted because you're sleeping with the CEO? The crudeness of the phrasing hit like a slap. James felt his jaw tighten. Because my work speaks for itself. It always has. Mr. Harper, we're not questioning your competence. Jennifer's tone shifted, trying for sympathy. But we have to consider how this looks to other employees, how it affects morale and trust in leadership. Then I'll resign. Today, I'll remove myself from the equation entirely. Both Gerald and Jennifer exchanged glances. Whatever response they'd been expecting, that wasn't it. You'd resign, Gerald asked carefully. Yes, if my relationship with Victoria is the problem, then eliminate me from the professional equation. She keeps her position, I find work elsewhere. Clean solution. Mr. Harper, that's very noble, but it's not noble. It's practical. James leaned forward. Victoria Sinclair saved this company from bankruptcy. She turned it into one of the most profitable firms in the region. Her value to Meridian is measurable and significant. My value is replaceable. There are 100 analysts who could do my job. There's no one who can lead this company the way she does. Jennifer made a note. We appreciate your willingness to consider that option. However, the board wants to address this situation more comprehensively. The board, James felt the ground shifting beneath him. The board knows. Thomas Brennan submitted a formal complaint this morning. He's calling for an emergency board meeting to discuss Ms. Sinclair's judgment and fitness to continue as CEO. The pieces clicked into place. The photographs, the timing. Thomas Brennan hadn't stumbled onto their relationship. He'd been hunting for it. He had us followed. Gerald's expression confirmed what his words didn't. I can't comment on Mr. Brennan's methods, but the board meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, January 4th at 10 a.m. Your attendance is mandatory, as is Ms. Sinclair's. What happens at this meeting? That depends on the board's assessment of the situation. Jennifer closed her folder. I'd suggest you prepare yourself for difficult questions and possibly difficult decisions. James left the HR office feeling like he'd been worked over with a baseball bat. The elevator ride back to 14 took an eternity. When the doors opened, Donovan was waiting. How bad? Board meeting Wednesday. They're going to force her to choose. Between you and her job. Something like that. James walked toward his desk, ignoring the stares. I told them I'd resign. Jim, I'm not letting them use me as a weapon against her, Donovan. I won't do it. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria sent from her private number. HR called me in. Board meeting Wednesday. Thomas filed a complaint. James typed back quickly. I know. Just left Morrison's office. They have photos of us. Photos from when Art Institute, Michigan Avenue, coffee shop. Someone was following us. The response took longer. When it came, James could feel Victoria's fury through the screen. Thomas. He's been trying to remove me for 2 years. This is his opening. What do? We fight. Meet me tonight. My place. 7 p.m. We plan our strategy. The rest of Monday crawled by in a fog of spreadsheets James couldn't focus on and meetings he attended in body only. He left at 5:30, went home to shower and change, then drove to Victoria's building with a sense of impending doom he couldn't shake. Marcus the doorman waved him through with a knowing nod. The elevator rose 40 floors in silence that felt judgmental. When the doors opened into Victoria's penthouse, she was waiting. She'd changed from her corporate armor into jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. But her eyes held the kind of fury that had built empires and destroyed competitors. Thomas Brennan is a petty, vindictive man who's been undermining me since I was promoted to CEO. She handed James a glass of wine he hadn't asked for. He wanted the position. The board chose me. He spent 7 years waiting for me to fail so he could swoop in as the savior. And we just gave him the ammunition he needed. No, we fell in love. That's not ammunition. That's being human. Victoria took a long drink of her own wine. But he'll twist it into proof that I'm unfit to lead, that I'm distracted, compromised, making decisions with my heart instead of my head. Are you, she looked at him sharply, what, making decisions with your heart? Because if you are, I need to know. I need to understand what this is costing you. Victoria set down her glass with careful precision. This is costing me everything I've built over 20 years, my reputation, my credibility, possibly my career. Yes, I'm making decisions with my heart. For the first time in my adult life, I'm choosing something that matters more than quarterly earnings and shareholder value. And if they make you choose between me and the CEO position, then I choose you. I already decided that, James, on New Year's Eve when we sent that email. I chose you. The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they felt like a burden too heavy to carry. I don't want you to sacrifice your career for me. It's not a sacrifice if I'm gaining something more valuable. How can you know that? We've known each other a week, Victoria. 1 week. What if this doesn't work out? What if 6 months from now we realize this was just holiday desperation and loneliness dressed up as love? You'll have thrown away everything for nothing. Then I'll have thrown it away for the chance at something real. That's still better than spending the rest of my life wondering what if. Victoria moved closer, taking his hands. I'm 45 years old. I've spent 2 decades being exactly what everyone expected me to be. The ruthless CEO, the ice queen, the woman who puts business before everything. And I'm miserable, James. I've been miserable for years. So this is about escape. No, this is about choosing life over the appearance of success. And yes, it's scary. Yes, it might not work. But I'd rather fail at living than succeed at being emotionally dead. James pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. They stood like that for a long moment, 2 people on the edge of a cliff trying to decide if the fall was worth the flight. Wednesday is going to be ugly, he finally murmured. I know. They're going to tear us apart, question everything, make this into something sordid and inappropriate. I know. And there's a very real chance we both walk out of that boardroom unemployed. I know. Victoria pulled back to look at him. But we walk out together, that has to count for something. They spent the rest of Monday evening preparing like lawyers before a capital case. Victoria pulled up every performance metric from her tenure as CEO. Revenue growth, cost reduction, market share expansion, employee retention. She built a PowerPoint presentation that would make a venture capitalist weep with joy. James compiled his own evidence. 20 years of performance reviews, all consistently excellent. Awards and commendations. Projects completed ahead of schedule and under budget. A paper trail proving his value to Meridian existed independent of any relationship with Victoria. By midnight, they'd constructed a defense that should have been bulletproof. It wouldn't matter. Tuesday passed in a haze of tension. James worked on autopilot, aware that every colleague who walked past his cubicle knew what was coming. Donovan checked on him twice, offering support James couldn't quite accept. I keep thinking about what you said, Donovan admitted during their second conversation, about finding someone who makes you feel alive. And I wonder if maybe I have been playing it too safe my whole life. Don't let my mess inspire you to blow up your career. Your mess might be the bravest thing I've seen in 20 years of corporate monotony. Donovan clapped him on the shoulder. Whatever happens Wednesday, I hope you know that. Victoria texted him updates throughout the day. Patricia Morrison, the only female board member, had called to offer quiet support. Robert Caldwell, the board chair, had warned her that Thomas had been lobbying other members aggressively. The vote might not go her way. They met again Tuesday evening, this time at James's apartment. Victoria seemed smaller somehow, the weight of the impending confrontation pressing her down into something less than the commanding presence she usually projected. I keep thinking about my mother, she said, curled into James's couch with a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. When I told her I was divorcing my husband, she said I was throwing away my chance at a normal life for a career that would never love me back. I told her she was wrong, that success would be enough. Was she right? I don't know, maybe, probably. Victoria finally took a sip of tea. I spent 15 years proving her wrong by being spectacularly successful, and now I'm about to prove her right by throwing it all away for love. You're not throwing it away, you're making a choice. Semantics, the result is the same. James sat beside her, taking the mug from her shaking hands. Victoria, you don't have to do this. If you want to end things before Wednesday, if you want to walk into that boardroom and tell them it was a mistake, no. The word came out fierce. I'm not giving them that. I'm not giving Thomas the satisfaction of watching me retreat and apologize for being human. If they want me gone, they're going to have to force me out, and I'm going to make them work for it. Wednesday morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of Chicago winter day that made people question their life choices. James dressed with the care of a soldier preparing for battle. Tie knotted perfectly. Shoes shined. Resume printed and ready. Victoria texted at 8 a.m. See you at 10. Whatever happens, no regrets. James typed back, no regrets. The Meridian Financial Boardroom occupied the entire north side of the 32nd floor. Glass walls, mahogany table leather chairs designed to make people feel simultaneously important and small. James had never been inside. Senior analyst Daw didn't get invited to the altar where corporate gods made decisions. He arrived at 9:50. Victoria was already there, standing by the windows in a charcoal suit that looked like armor. She didn't acknowledge him when he entered, maintaining the professional distance that no longer fooled anyone. The board members filed in over the next 5 minutes, 9 people who held Victoria's professional life in their hands. Robert Caldwell, 72, and pragmatic, took the head chair. Thomas Brennan, 58, and vindictive, sat directly across from Victoria with a smile that promised blood. Patricia Morrison, 56, and the only other woman in the room, gave Victoria a small nod that might have been solidarity or farewell. At exactly 10 a.m., Robert called the meeting to order. Thank you all for convening on short notice. We're here to discuss concerns raised by Thomas Brennan regarding CEO Victoria Sinclair's professional judgment and potential conflicts of interest. Robert's voice carried the weight of exhaustion. Victoria, James, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your cooperation. Thomas didn't wait for Robert to continue. Let's not pretend this is anything other than what it is. Victoria Sinclair, our CEO, is engaged in a romantic relationship with a subordinate employee. That's not a minor HR issue. That's a fundamental failure of leadership and judgment. Victoria's voice remained steady. Mr. Brennan, James and I disclosed our relationship to HR the first day possible after the holiday closure. We've submitted a transfer request to eliminate any reporting structure conflict. We're following every applicable policy. Following policy doesn't change the optics. Thomas pulled out the same photographs James had seen in HR. These images show you and Mr. Harper conducting your relationship in public where anyone could see, where clients, competitors, and employees could witness the CEO of Meridian Financial in a compromising position. Compromising, Victoria's control started to crack. We were walking in public, visiting a museum, having coffee, perfectly normal activities for 2 people getting to know each other. Normal for 2 equals, not normal for a CEO and her subordinate. Patricia Morrison interjected, her voice sharp. Thomas, let's be honest about what this is really about. If Victoria were a man and James were a woman, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Male CEOs date and marry employees all the time without facing this kind of scrutiny. That's different. Different how? Because Victoria is a woman, because she's successful, because she dared to have a personal life, because she's supposed to be setting an example. Thomas's composure slipped. She's the face of this company. Her behavior reflects on all of us. Robert raised a hand, stopping the argument before it escalated further. Let's keep this professional. Victoria, the board has concerns about the power dynamic inherent in your relationship with Mr. Harper. Can you address those concerns? Victoria stood, smoothing her jacket. She'd prepared for this. James could see it in the way she squared her shoulders, the way her voice found its CEO register. I've been CEO of Meridian for 7 years. In that time, I've increased revenue by 340%. Stock price has doubled. Employee retention is at an all-time high. I've made this company profitable, stable, and respected in our industry. She clicked through her presentation, numbers and graphs filling the screen. My relationship with James Harper does not change any of that. It does not affect my ability to lead. It does not compromise my judgment in business matters. But it compromises our trust in your judgment overall, Thomas countered. You chose to pursue a relationship with someone you have power over. That demonstrates a fundamental lack of understanding about appropriate boundaries. Or it demonstrates that I'm a human being capable of falling in love. Victoria's control frayed at the edges. I've given this company everything for 7 years. 80-hour weeks. Missed holidays. No personal life whatsoever. And the first time I choose to be human, you want to crucify me for it. Robert cleared his throat. No one wants to crucify anyone, Victoria, but we have a responsibility to consider what's best for Meridian. And right now, this situation creates complications we need to address. Then address them. I've offered solutions. James transfers departments. I recuse myself from any decisions regarding his employment. We maintain complete professional separation at work. What more do you want? We want you to end the relationship, Thomas stated flatly. Immediately. Prove that you can put the company first the way a CEO should. The room went silent. James felt his hands curl into fists under the table. No, Victoria's voice cut through the tension. I won't end my relationship to satisfy your outdated ideas about how CEOs should behave. Robert leaned back in his chair, looking older than his 72 years. Victoria, I'm going to be frank with you. The board has discussed several options. None of them are ideal, but we need to move forward. What options? Option 1. You end the relationship immediately. Mr. Harper transfers to corporate strategy as requested. We issue a statement emphasizing Meridian's commitment to professional standards, and we move past this. Not acceptable. Option 2. You take a 3-month leave of absence. During that time, you and Mr. Harper determine whether this relationship is serious enough to warrant the professional sacrifices it requires. If you decide to continue after 3 months, we'll revisit the conversation about your position. Also not acceptable. You're asking me to prove my commitment by abandoning my job for 3 months. That's not a leave of absence, that's a forced resignation disguised as consideration. Thomas smiled. Which brings us to option 3. You resign as CEO. We appoint an interim leader. You keep your board position and stock options, but day-to-day operations transfer to someone whose personal life isn't a liability. Victoria's hands shook. James could see the fury building, the years of controlled rage finally finding an outlet. Let me make sure I understand. You want me to either sacrifice my personal life, abandon my position for 3 months while you groom my replacement, or resign entirely. Those are my options. Those are the options the board feels comfortable with, Robert confirmed. Comfortable. You feel comfortable asking me to choose between the career I built from nothing and the first genuine relationship I've had in a decade. You feel comfortable reducing my value to this company to a problem that needs to be managed. Victoria. But she was past listening. 20 years of being perfect, of sacrificing everything, of playing by rules, designed to keep people like her small and manageable, detonated in a single moment. I have spent 7 years as CEO of this company. I have made every one of you richer than you were when I started. I have built a legacy of success that will outlast most of you. And you're sitting here telling me that loving someone makes me unfit to lead. Her voice rose with each word. Yeah. No. I won't end my relationship. I won't take a forced leave. And I sure as hell won't resign to make your lives easier. Thomas leaned forward. Then what do you propose, Victoria? Because we can't simply ignore this. Why not? Why can't you treat me like you'd treat any male CEO in this position? Why can't you acknowledge that I'm allowed to have a life outside these walls? Because you chose not to. Thomas's restraint finally broke. You built your entire identity as the CEO who sacrifices everything, the ice queen who puts business above all else. You made yourself into a symbol, and now you're angry that we expect you to maintain that image. I'm angry that I was required to become inhuman to succeed. Victoria's hands pressed flat against the table. I'm angry that 7 years of excellence count for nothing the moment I demonstrate a single human need. I'm angry that you're more concerned with optics than reality. Patricia Morrison spoke up again. Robert, this is ridiculous. We're talking about forcing out the most successful CEO this company has ever had because she's in a relationship. Do you realize how that's going to look when it inevitably becomes public? It looks better than the alternative, Thomas shot back. It looks like we have standards. It looks like we punish women for having personal lives while giving men a pass. Patricia turned to Victoria. I support you. Whatever decision you make, you have my vote. One vote isn't enough, Robert interjected gently. And Patricia, I understand your position, but we need to consider the broader implications. Victoria, I'm not trying to force you out. I supported your promotion 7 years ago because you were the best candidate. You've exceeded every expectation. But this situation creates real problems for the company. Victoria straightened, and James saw the shift in her posture, the resignation settling over her like a shroud. You're right, she said quietly. This situation does create problems, so let me solve them for you. Victoria, don't. I resign, effective immediately. You want me gone without having to force me out. Done. I quit. The boardroom erupted. 3 board members talking at once. Patricia Morrison shouting objections. Thomas Brennan looking simultaneously triumphant and shocked. Robert Caldwell raised his hands for silence. Victoria, let's not be hasty. I'm not being hasty. I'm being clear. Her voice had gone cold, the CEO mask snapping back into place. You can't force me out if I leave voluntarily. Draft whatever press release you want. Pursuing new opportunities. Stepping down for personal reasons. I don't care. But I'm done playing by rules designed to keep me in check. James stood. Every head in the room swiveled toward him. Then I resign too. Victoria's eyes widened. James, no. I'm not letting you do this alone. He addressed the board directly. You want to know why Victoria Sinclair is the best CEO you'll ever have? Because she just gave up everything she built rather than compromise her integrity. That's leadership. And if you can't see that, you don't deserve her. Thomas laughed. How touching. The subordinate defending his meal ticket. I'm defending the woman I love. Something you clearly wouldn't understand. Robert stood, trying to regain control. Mr. Harper, there's no need for you to resign. You've done nothing wrong. Except fall in love with my CEO, which apparently is the worst crime either of us could commit. James moved toward the door. My resignation will be on Gerald Morrison's desk by end of day. Good luck finding someone half as competent as Victoria. He walked out without waiting for a response. Victoria followed 30 seconds later, catching him at the elevator. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. The elevator doors closed on the chaos they'd left behind. 42 floors down in silence that felt both liberating and terrifying. When they reached the lobby, Victoria stopped him with a hand on his arm. We just destroyed our careers. Yeah. For a relationship that's barely 2 weeks old. Yeah. Are you regretting it? James looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone exhausted and relieved and scared and free all at once. Not even a little bit. Victoria laughed, the sound verging on hysteria. We're insane. Probably, but we're insane together. They walked out of Meridian Financial Tower at 11:15 on Wednesday morning, January 4th. Two professionals who'd just thrown away decades of work for something neither of them could quite define but both recognized as worth the cost. The severance package arrived via email 3 hours after they left the building. Victoria's was generous 3 years salary vested stock options, worth another $2 million, continued health insurance for 6 months. The corporate way of saying goodbye without admitting fault. James received 2 weeks' pay and a polite suggestion to clean out his desk within 48 hours. They sat in Victoria's penthouse that afternoon, laptops open, staring at numbers that should have felt comforting, but instead highlighted the vast gulf between their professional worth in Meridian's eyes. "I have enough to live on for 5 years without working," Victoria observed, her voice flat. "You have enough for maybe 2 months. I have savings. It'll stretch further than 2 months." "How much further?" James closed his laptop rather than answer. They both knew his savings wouldn't last past summer if he didn't find work quickly. And finding work as the analyst who'd gotten himself fired for sleeping with his CEO wouldn't be easy. His phone rang. "Donovan." "I heard. The whole building heard. Thomas Brennan is practically throwing a party." "I'm sure he is." "Jim, I need you to listen carefully. I have a friend at Community Finance Alliance. They're a nonprofit that helps small businesses with financial planning and literacy. They need a CFO. "Donovan, I appreciate it, but the pay is $90,000 a year. I know that's a third of what you were making at Meridian, but it's honest work, meaningful work, and they don't care about corporate drama." James glanced at Victoria, who was pretending not to listen while clearly hanging on every word. "Can you send me the contact information?" "Already did. Her name is Margaret Sullivan. She's expecting your call." The interview happened 2 days later in a converted warehouse on the south side that smelled like coffee and optimism. Margaret Sullivan was 55 with gray hair pulled into a practical bun and eyes that suggested she'd seen every kind of human struggle and refused to be impressed by corporate credentials. "So you're the analyst who quit Meridian for love." She poured coffee from a carafe that had seen better decades. "That took guts or stupidity." "I haven't decided which. Probably both." "Why do you want to work for a nonprofit that pays a third of your previous salary?" James accepted the coffee, bitter and strong. "Because I spent 20 years helping rich people get richer. I'd like to spend the next 20 helping people who actually need it." "That's a nice speech, but you're 53 years old with a resume that screams corporate. Why should I believe you want to trade corner offices for this?" She gestured around the cramped office with its mismatched furniture and water-stained ceiling tiles. "Because my wife died 8 years ago. She was a nurse who spent her life helping people, and in her last months she told me she was proud of me, but wished I'd done something that mattered. I thought climbing the corporate ladder mattered. I was wrong." Margaret studied him over the rim of her mug. "And Victoria Sinclair, the CEO, where does she fit into this redemption narrative?" "She showed me that it's never too late to choose differently, to build a life instead of just a resume." "That's beautiful. Also convenient given that you're both unemployed now." Margaret set down her coffee. "I'm going to be brutally honest with you, James. I need a CFO who can stretch dollars until they scream. Someone who can look at a budget held together with prayer and find a way to make it work. Can you do that?" "Yes." "I need someone who won't get bored when the most exciting part of their day is teaching a bodega owner how to read a cash flow statement. Can you do that?" "Yes." "And I need someone who's here because they want to be, not because they're running away from something." "Are you running away?" James thought about the question carefully. "I'm running towards something. There's a difference." Margaret smiled for the first time. "When can you start?" Victoria's path back to employment proved equally unexpected. Brighton Advisory, a boutique consulting firm specializing in mid-market companies, reached out 3 weeks after her resignation. The managing partner had read the business press coverage, carefully neutral pieces about Victoria's departure to pursue other opportunities, and saw an opportunity. "We don't want you to run our firm," Eleanor Brighton explained over lunch at a restaurant far from the financial district. "We want you to be you. Take on projects that interest you. Work with clients who need your expertise. Build your own book of business on your own terms." "What's the catch?" "The catch is you make 40% of what you did as CEO. The upside is you work 3 days a week and you get to choose which 3 days." Eleanor, 62 and sharp as a scalpel, leaned back. "I spent 30 years in corporate consulting. made partner at 40, burned out at 50. Spent the next 5 years trying to remember why I'd wanted the partnership in the first place. Then I started this firm with the radical idea that work should enhance life, not replace it. That sounds idealistic. It's pragmatic. My consultants are happy, so they do good work. Clients are happy because they get excellent advice without the corporate overhead. Everyone wins. Eleanor signaled for the check. You've spent 7 years proving you can run a billion-dollar company. Now prove you can build something that feeds your soul instead of just your bank account. Victoria accepted the offer that afternoon. By March, they'd settled into a rhythm that felt both strange and sustainable. James left for CFA at 7:30 each morning, spent his days teaching immigrant entrepreneurs about balance sheets and profit margins, and came home at 6 with stories about people building dreams on borrowed capital and stubborn hope. Victoria worked 3 days a week from home, flying occasionally to meet clients who needed her particular brand of strategic insight. They bought a 2-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park for $450,000, splitting the down payment in a way that made James uncomfortable. But Victoria insisted was fair. The place had hardwood floors and radiators that clanked on cold mornings and windows that overlooked a street where actual neighbors said hello. It's not $12 million, Victoria observed the day they moved in, surveying the modest space. No, it's better. It feels like people actually live here. The first real test came in late March when James's checking account dropped below $1,000. His savings were running out faster than anticipated, the down payment had taken more than expected, and adjusting to nonprofit salary proved harder than he'd admitted. Victoria noticed when he started skipping lunch, packing sandwiches, instead of buying downtown. How bad is it? It's fine. James, he showed her his bank statement. She went quiet for a long moment. Why didn't you tell me? Because I'm 53 years old and I should be able to support myself. That's ego talking, not practicality. Victoria grabbed her laptop. How much do you need to get through the next 3 months? I'm not taking money from you. Why not? We're building a life together. That includes sharing financial burdens. Because it makes me feel like I'm being kept, like I'm some trophy husband living off his sugar mama. The words came out harsher than intended. Victoria's expression hardened. Is that what you think this is? You think I'm with you for some ego trip? No, but that's what everyone else will think. I don't care what everyone else thinks. I care that the man I love is struggling and won't let me help because of some outdated idea about masculinity and self-sufficiency. It's not outdated, it's called having pride. Pride doesn't pay rent, James. Victoria stood, laptop in hand. I'm transferring $15,000 to your account. That's not charity, that's partnership. When you're stable, you can contribute more. Until then, let me carry the weight. James wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but the numbers didn't lie and pride wouldn't cover next month's bills. I'll pay you back. It's not a loan, it's us taking care of each other. That's what love means when you strip away the romance and face reality. The money arrived the next morning. James stared at his account balance, suddenly comfortable again, and felt something shift inside him. Not gratitude exactly, something more complex. The recognition that traditional roles and expectations didn't map cleanly onto modern relationships, and maybe that was okay. April brought unexpected healing in the form of Elise showing up at their condo with Thai food and an apology. I was wrong. His daughter set the takeout bags on their kitchen counter, not quite meeting James's eyes. About Victoria, about this relationship, I was scared you were being used and I lashed out. Victoria, who'd been working in the other room, emerged cautiously. You had every right to be concerned. Maybe, but I should have trusted Dad's judgment. Elise finally looked at both of them. I did some research, read about what happened at Meridian. You both quit to protect each other. That's not someone using my father, that's someone who loves him. James pulled his daughter into a hug. Thank you for saying that. I'm still processing it, but I'd like to try. To get to know Victoria as a person, not just as Dad's controversial girlfriend. They ate Thai food and talked for 3 hours. Elise shared stories about her classroom, the second graders who could barely sit still but somehow absorb knowledge like sponges. Victoria talked about her consulting work helping a family-owned manufacturing company navigate succession planning. James watched the two most important women in his life find common ground and felt something unknot in his chest. By June, 6 months after that night at Murphy's Tavern, they'd achieved something resembling stability. James was good at his job, excellent even. He'd helped 15 small businesses restructure their debt, taught 20 entrepreneurs how to read financial statements, and discovered that impact mattered more than prestige. Victoria had built a client roster of mid-market companies who valued her insight without demanding she sacrifice her humanity for their bottom line. They cooked dinner together most nights, taking turns burning things and laughing about their collective culinary incompetence. They went running along the lakefront on weekends, James maintaining a steady pace while Victoria pushed harder, driven by the same competitive instinct that had made her a successful CEO. They were learning each other's rhythms, the small accommodations that turned cohabitation into partnership. But Victoria still hadn't spoken to her mother in 4 years. "I keep thinking I should call," she admitted one evening in August, staring at her phone like it might bite. "But I don't know what to say. Hi, Mom. Remember how you told me I'd die alone and unloved? Well, I almost did, but then I met someone. Want to judge my choices some more?" That's one approach. Probably not the most effective. "What did you do when you introduced Linda to your parents?" "My mom loved her immediately. My dad took longer to warm up, but he came around." James moved to sit beside her. "But that was different. Your relationship with your mother is complicated by years of expectations and disappointment. Mine was just regular family awkwardness. I'm 46 years old. I shouldn't need my mother's approval. But you want it anyway. That's human." Victoria's finger hovered over her mother's contact. Then she pressed call before she could change her mind. Margaret Hayes answered on the third ring, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who'd trained herself not to expect connection. "Victoria, this is unexpected." "Hi, Mom. I know we haven't talked in a while." 4 years, but who's counting?" The bitterness was familiar, comfortable in its predictability. Victoria almost hung up, but James's hand on her shoulder steadied her. "I called to tell you I'm getting married." Silence stretched across the line. Then carefully, "To whom?" "His name is James Harper. He's 53. He works for a nonprofit helping small businesses. He's kind and decent, and he makes me want to be a better person." "Not a CEO then? Not another corporate climber?" "No, he's the opposite of what you thought I needed. And that's why he's perfect." Margaret's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "Are you happy?" The question surprised Victoria enough that she answered honestly. "Yes, for the first time in 20 years, I'm actually happy." "Then I'd like to meet him, if that's something you want." Victoria looked at James, who nodded. "We could come to Scottsdale, maybe for a long weekend." "I'd like that. Victoria, I'm sorry for pushing you so hard towards success that you forgot how to live. I was wrong." The apology, unexpected and raw, caught in Victoria's throat. "I made my own choices, Mom, but thank you for saying that." They planned the trip for September, flying into Phoenix on a Friday afternoon with enough anxiety between them to fuel a small aircraft. Margaret Hayes lived in a gated community that screamed comfortable retirement. Her house smaller than Victoria expected, but tastefully decorated in the style of someone who'd given up trying to impress. She answered the door in linen pants and a simple blouse, her silver hair styled, but not sprayed, her face lined with years of decisions she couldn't undo. She looked at James, first evaluating him with the kind of thoroughness that came from decades of trusting no one's judgment but her own. "So you're the man who made my daughter quit being CEO." "I'm the man who loved your daughter enough that she felt safe choosing herself over her job." James extended a hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hayes." Margaret shook his hand, then pulled Victoria into an awkward hug that lasted 3 seconds longer than comfortable. "Come in. I made lunch. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches." "I assume you still eat sandwiches, Victoria, or have you transcended normal food?" The tension broke with laughter, and they spent the weekend again learning how to be a family again. Margaret told stories about Victoria's childhood, the driven little girl who organized her toys by color and size, who cried when she got second place in the school spelling bee because second wasn't good enough. Victoria shared stories about her years climbing the corporate ladder, the sacrifices that had seemed necessary at the time, but now felt like self-imposed exile. James talked about Linda, about loss and learning to live again, about finding Victoria in a dive bar and recognizing someone as lost as he'd been. On their last evening sitting on Margaret's patio watching the desert sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, Victoria's mother spoke the words that had been building for 4 years. I pushed you to achieve because I was afraid. Your father left when you were 12 and I panicked. I thought if I made you strong enough, successful enough, you'd never need anyone and therefore never be hurt. She took a sip of wine, her hands unsteady. But I made you so strong you couldn't let anyone in. And that's a different kind of hurt. I'm sorry. Victoria reached across and took her mother's hand. I forgive you. And I'm sorry too, for staying away so long. You had reasons. Not good enough reasons. Not anymore. The proposal happened 3 weeks later in their Lincoln Park kitchen on a Wednesday evening when neither of them was particularly prepared for life to shift. They were cooking dinner, attempting chicken piccata from a recipe Victoria had found online, and arguing about whether capers were a necessary ingredient or a food crime. James was at the stove. Victoria was mincing garlic with the concentration she usually reserved for contract negotiations, and something about the ordinariness of the moment crystallized everything he'd been feeling into sudden clarity. He turned off the burner and got down on one knee right there on the kitchen floor. Victoria looked up from her cutting board knife still in hand. What are you doing? Marry me. James, I'm covered in flour. I don't care. Marry me. He pulled out a ring he'd bought 2 weeks ago and been carrying in his pocket ever since, waiting for the perfect moment that kept not arriving. 9 months ago, I met you drunk and crying in a bar. You were the most powerful woman in Chicago and the loneliest person I'd ever seen. And I was a 52-year-old widower who'd forgotten what it felt like to be alive. Victoria set down the knife, her hands trembling. We've burned so many dinners together. We've figured out how to share a bathroom and a bank account. We've introduced each other to our families and somehow survived. We've built this weird, imperfect, wonderful life from the wreckage of our old ones. James opened the ring box. I'm 53 years old. You're 46. We're not kids with our whole lives ahead of us. But we have right now, and every right now with you feels like enough. That's possibly the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. Is that a no? Victoria laughed through tears. That's a yes, obviously yes, 1,000 times yes. The ring was simple white gold with a small diamond, nothing ostentatious, chosen because it looked like something she'd actually wear. She slipped it on with shaking hands, then pulled James to his feet and kissed him while the forgotten garlic burned on the cutting board and the smoke alarm started its piercing wail. They got married on December 25th, exactly 1 year after they'd met in the Lincoln Park Conservatory, surrounded by plants that refused to acknowledge Chicago's winter. 50 guests filled the small ceremony space, Elise serving as maid of honor, Donovan standing as best man, Margaret Hayes in the front row, crying with the kind of relief that came from watching a daughter finally choose happiness. Rachel Mitchell came, Victoria's former assistant, who'd found new employment at a tech startup and seemed genuinely thrilled to be free of corporate politics. Robert Caldwell sent his regrets and a generous gift card, along with a note expressing his respect for Victoria's courage. Thomas Brennan's absence went unmentioned and unmourned. The ceremony itself was brief. They'd written their own vows, standing before a justice of the peace who'd heard thousands of promises, but seemed genuinely moved by theirs. James spoke first, his voice steady despite the emotion. Victoria, I promise to always choose you even when it's hard. I promise to love you not in spite of your intensity, but because of it. I promise to play guitar badly, burn dinner occasionally, and remind you every day that your value isn't measured by your job title. And I promise to keep showing up through boring Wednesday nights and exciting adventures and everything in between. Because love isn't about the big moments. It's about choosing each other in all the small ones. Victoria's turn came, her CEO voice cracking around the edges. James, I promise to choose courage over fear. I promise to build a life, not just a career. I promise to be present instead of perfect. I promise to let you see me at my worst and trust you'll stay anyway. And I promise to love you fiercely, not because you saved me, but because you showed me how to save myself. You taught me that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be, and I was meant to be yours. They kissed to applause, and somewhere in the conservatory's humid warmth, two people who'd spent decades climbing the wrong mountains finally reached the summit that mattered. The reception was held at a restaurant in Wicker Park, nothing fancy, just good food and better company. Elise gave a toast that made James cry, talking about watching her father come back to life over the past year. Donovan spoke about friendship and courage, about how James had taught him that playing it safe was just another way of giving up. Margaret Hayes raised her glass last, her voice thick with years of regret transformed into grace. To my daughter who had to lose everything to find what mattered, and to James who was brave enough to see past the armor to the woman underneath. May you both continue choosing love over fear, joy over achievement, and life over the hollow promises of success. They danced until midnight, James discovering that Victoria was surprisingly good at dancing when she let herself be bad at it first. They cut a cake decorated with simple flowers, fed each other pieces, while their guests cheered, and James thought about how a year ago he'd been alone in his apartment, wondering if this was all life had left to offer. At the end of the night, as guests filtered out into the cold December evening, Victoria pulled James aside. "Thank you." "For what?" "For walking me home that first night. For seeing me when I was invisible to myself. For staying when I gave you every reason to run. You don't have to thank me for loving you. That's the easy part, though." She smiled. "You say that now. Wait until I burn dinner again tomorrow. I'll love you even when the smoke alarm goes off." And they drove home through Chicago's streets, strung with the same holiday lights that had guided them together a year ago. Two people who'd bet everything on each other and somehow won. 3 years after that December night in Murphy's Tavern, James Harper and Victoria Sinclair walked the same route they'd walked when everything changed. The snow fell with the same relentless determination coating Michigan Avenue in white that turned gray under streetlights. Victoria was 48 now, her hair showing streaks of silver she no longer bothered to hide. James was 55, his face more lined, but somehow lighter, like he'd spent 3 years shedding weight he'd carried for decades. They walked hand in hand, bundled against the cold that had once felt cruel, but now felt familiar, even comforting. Murphy's Tavern looked exactly the same. Same scarred booths, same jukebox, same bartender who either didn't recognize them or was too professional to acknowledge it. They ordered coffee and sat in the booth where it all began. 3 years ago, I was sitting here drunk and desperate, Victoria mused, wrapping both hands around her mug, trying to figure out how I'd ended up so successful and so empty. And now I'm sitting here with coffee and you. Much better outcome. The years between then and now had been messier than either anticipated. Victoria's consulting business had grown steadily, bringing in Margaret Sullivan as a junior partner, creating a firm that specialized in helping mid-market companies navigate growth without losing their humanity. James had been promoted to executive director at CFA, overseeing 5 regional offices and a budget that required constant creativity to stretch. They made good money together. Not CEO money, not even close, but enough. Enough to live comfortably, to travel occasionally, to donate to causes that mattered, to help Elise with her classroom supplies when public school budgets fell short. Their condo in Lincoln Park had become a home filled with evidence of actual living books piled on every surface. Victoria's guitar lessons happening twice a week despite her continued lack of natural talent. James's running shoes by the door perpetually muddy from lakefront trails. "Do you miss it?" James asked. "The power, the prestige." Victoria considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, the challenge of running something that big, making decisions that mattered. But I don't miss who I had to be to keep that life. And I love who I get to be now." "Who's that?" "Someone imperfect, someone learning, someone who burns dinner and takes guitar lessons and has loud family dinners. Someone human." They finished their coffee and walked toward Victoria's old building, the one with the $12 million penthouse she'd hated. A different name occupied the resident list now. Someone else's expensive emptiness. They continued walking until they reached their building, the one that cost a fraction of her old place, but felt like an actual home. In the lobby, James checked their mailbox out of habit. One envelope stood out. Expensive paper embossed, return address, Meridian Financial. Victoria took it with careful fingers, opened it in the elevator, while James watched her face cycle through surprise and something like vindication. The letter was from Robert Caldwell. Thomas Brennan had resigned 3 months ago after a financial scandal using company resources for personal investments, manipulating quarterly reports to hide losses. The board wanted Victoria to consider returning as strategic advisor part-time with complete autonomy and a generous consulting fee. They want you back. They want to cover themselves now that Thomas exposed himself as exactly what I always said he was. Victoria handed James the letter. What do you think? I think it's your decision. But what do you think? James read the letter carefully. I think they're offering you vindication, and I think you should decide whether you need that from them or if you've already moved past it. Victoria took back the letter, read it once more, then pulled out her phone. She typed a response, showed it to James before sending. Mr. Caldwell, thank you for the offer. I'm honored that the board would consider my return. However, I'm building something more valuable than career redemption. I'm building a life worth living. My work with Brighton Advisory fulfills me. My partnership with my husband sustains me. My current balance brings me joy. Meridian was an important chapter in my story, but that chapter is closed. Best regards, Victoria Sinclair Harper. She hit send without hesitation. No regrets? James asked. None. 3 years ago, I would have jumped at that offer, the chance to prove them wrong to reclaim my throne. Victoria pocketed her phone. But I don't need to prove anything to them anymore. Success isn't about corner offices or board seats. It's about waking up next to the person you love and not dreading the day ahead. They rode the elevator to their floor in comfortable silence. Inside their condo, evidence of their life together sprawled everywhere. Victoria's consulting files mixed with James's nonprofit grant applications on the dining table. Their running shoes tangled by the door, the guitar Victoria would never master leaning against the wall beside James's old one. He'd started playing again. Outside their window, Chicago continued its relentless existence. The city that had watched them meet drunk and desperate, fall in love despite impossible odds, quit their jobs, and rebuild their lives from scratch. Now witnessed them settling into the kind of ordinary happiness most people spent lifetimes chasing. Do you know what I realize? Victoria said softly, curling against James on their couch. Men at midlife aren't obsolete. They just know the value of things that can't be measured in quarterly reports. Experience matters. Wisdom matters. The ability to walk away from what doesn't serve you matters. That's not weakness. That's strength earned through surviving enough years to know the difference. Is that your way of saying I'm old but valuable? It's my way of saying you taught me that titles fade and money runs out, but real love, the kind built on choosing each other every single day, that's forever. James kissed the top of her head. Outside Chicago, snow continued falling, covering the city in white erasing footprints and making everything temporarily clean. 3 years ago, Victoria Sinclair had been the most powerful woman in Chicago and the loneliest person James Harper had ever met. 3 years ago, James had been a 52-year-old widower who'd forgotten what it felt like to want anything beyond comfortable numbness. Now they were just two people who'd gambled everything on each other and discovered that sometimes the biggest risks yielded the richest rewards, not measured in money or prestige or power, but in small Wednesday evenings and burnt dinners, and the quiet knowledge that they'd chosen love when every rational voice screamed to choose safety instead. I love you, Victoria whispered. I love you too, James answered, and meant it with every fiber of accumulated experience and hard-won wisdom that came from surviving long enough to know what mattered. They fell asleep on their couch that night, wrapped in each other in the kind of contentment that couldn't be bought or earned or achieved through quarterly reports. The kind that only came from two people brave enough to lose everything in order to find what they'd been missing all along. Chicago's snow continued falling outside their window. In the morning, new tracks would be laid down, new paths forged, new choices made. But tonight, James Harper and Victoria Sinclair simply held each other and breathed and existed in the space between past regrets and future uncertainties, exactly where they needed to be, together.